It was Christmas week, the kind of time when the world slows down and speeds up at the same time. Airports were packed, stores were loud, and homes were being warmed by ovens and space heaters and the quiet comfort of knowing you were indoors. Somewhere far from all of that, the cold had no decorations, no music, no mercy. The temperature dropped hard after sunset. Wind scraped across open ground and cut through layers like they weren't even there. Every breath burned. Fingers went numb, then useless. The kind of cold that doesn't just make you uncomfortable, but starts making decisions for you. The kind that turns minutes into threats. The people out there hadn't planned to be there this long. Something had gone wrong earlier, something small at first. It always is. A delay, a wrong turn, equipment that didn't behave the way it should. By the time they realized they were in trouble, the daylight was already slipping away. And with it, their margin for survival. Christmas was coming, but out there it didn't matter what day it was. The cold didn't care. It kept working, hour after hour, pulling heat from bodies, draining batteries, slowing thoughts. The kind of cold that makes you tired first, then confused, then quiet. Hypothermia doesn't announce itself. It convinces you to stop fighting. They tried to stay moving, but movement costs energy. Energy costs heat. Heat was already almost gone. Their shelter wasn't enough. Their hands shook too much to do the small things that keep you alive. Even talking became work. Words froze before they could land. Above them, far away, the operation was still running. Christmas week doesn't stop missions. It doesn't stop watches or patrols or men who've learned not to measure time in holidays. But it does make everything heavier. Everyone knows where they're supposed to be, who they're supposed to be with. And everyone knows that out here, someone always isn't. The cold changed the math. It shortened timelines. It turned soon into now. What might have been survivable in milder conditions became a race no one had planned to run. Every delay mattered. Every missed window closed another door. Frost built up where it shouldn't. Electronics struggled. Screens dimmed. Signals weakened. The environment started eating the tools designed to beat it. Even experience only goes so far when nature decides to press down hard enough. One of them stopped feeling his feet. Another couldn't stop shivering. Someone else grew strangely calm, the dangerous kind. They knew enough to recognize the signs, which made it worse. Knowing what was happening didn't stop it. It only added urgency to hands that wouldn't cooperate. Christmas lights were being switched on somewhere else in the world. Children were counting days. Families were making plans. Out there, survival narrowed to the next 10 minutes. Then the next 5. Attempts to get attention were made carefully. Power was precious. Every transmission took something that couldn't be replaced. The signal had to be right. Too strong, and it would die too fast. Too weak, and no one would see it. Timing mattered. Direction mattered. Luck mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. The cold kept pushing. It pressed into joints, into lungs, into thoughts. It slowed reactions just enough to be dangerous. Even fear dulled under its weight. The body started prioritizing the wrong things, shutting down the edges first, pulling inward, conserving for a future that might not arrive. Up above, eyes scanned terrain that looked empty, lifeless, frozen into stillness. But the cold doesn't look dangerous from a distance. It looks quiet. It hides its damage well. A place like that can kill without ever moving. Somewhere in that white silence, a small, imperfect signal fought its way out, fragile and brief, carrying just enough information to matter if someone noticed it in time. By the time anyone could have described them as survivors, they were already losing the fight. Their bodies were still upright, still breathing, still technically alive, but the line between holding on and slipping away had thinned to almost nothing. Hypothermia doesn't crash into you all at once. It creeps. It negotiates. It convinces. The shivering had started hours ago, violent at first, teeth chattering hard enough to hurt. That stage didn't last. Shivering burns energy, and energy was the one thing they didn't have. When it slowed, when it stopped, it felt like relief. That was the lie. Warmth hadn't returned. The body had simply given up on trying to make more. Hands became clumsy tools. Simple tasks turned impossible. Zippers refused to line up. Buckles slipped from numb fingers. One man kept dropping the same piece of gear, bending to pick it up again and again, not realizing he was burning precious heat every time he moved. Another stared at his gloves like he didn't recognize them. Speech changed. Sentences came out slower, slurred at the edges. Words were forgotten halfway through. Someone laughed at the wrong moment, a short burst of sound that didn't match anything happening around them. It should have been funny. Instead, it scared the others more than the cold. Judgment was next. Good decisions require warmth. Cold steals it quietly. One of them suggested resting, just for a minute. Sitting down, closing eyes. The suggestion sounded reasonable. It almost always does. They had to fight not just the environment, but their own instincts turning against them. Skin lost its color. Faces went pale, then waxy. Lips darkened. Noses stiffened. Pain faded, replaced by a heavy numbness that spread inward. The cold stopped announcing itself. It just stayed. They knew the textbook signs. They'd been trained. That knowledge didn't make their bodies cooperate. Training tells you what's happening. It doesn't restore circulation. It doesn't restart chemical reactions slowing inside your cells. It doesn't make muscles obey when nerves are misfiring. Energy was rationed without anyone saying the word. Movements got smaller. Voices quieter. They huddled not for comfort, but because it was the last functional strategy left. Shared heat was better than none. Even that came with a cost. Moisture built up. Sweat cooled. Everything was a trade-off with no good options. One of them started to drift. His eyes wouldn't stay focused. When spoken to, he answered a beat too late, like the question had to travel a long distance to reach him. Someone shook his shoulder harder than necessary. He blinked, confused, irritated, then apologetic without knowing why. The wind found every opening. It slipped under collars, through seams, into boots. Each gust stripped away another thin layer of warmth they couldn't afford to lose. The cold wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. It worked the way time works on stone. They tried to stay alert by talking, but conversation stalled. There was nothing new to say. Jokes died halfway through. Memories felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Christmas came up once, mentioned softly, then dropped. Thinking about warmth made the cold sharper. Calories ran low. The body needs fuel to make heat. Without it, systems slow down. Muscles weaken. Coordination disappears. One man stumbled and didn't bother correcting himself right away. The ground felt almost inviting. Solid. Still. Fear faded, which was worse. Fear makes you fight. Apathy makes you accept. The cold wrapped thoughts in cotton, dulling edges, smoothing urgency into something manageable, something you could live with for a little while longer. They checked each other constantly, not because it helped much, but because it was something to do. Something to keep hands moving and minds engaged. They counted breaths, watched chest rises, looked for signs they already knew how to recognize. Time became slippery. Minutes stretched. Hours collapsed. No one could say how long they'd been there anymore. Watches were checked and rechecked, numbers failing to stick. The cold was eating memory as efficiently as it ate heat. By the time help became more than a concept, more than a hope, they were already operating on borrowed margins. Core temperatures dropping into ranges where the heart misfires, where blood thickens, where consciousness flickers like a weak signal struggling to stay on long enough to be noticed. The signal wasn't meant to be dramatic. It wasn't a flare cutting the sky or a voice breaking over an open channel. It was small, technical, almost forgettable. A quiet attempt to say we're still here to anyone who might be listening at the exact right moment. Power was the first enemy. Batteries don't like cold. They drain faster, sometimes without warning, sometimes lying about how much they have left. Every device was checked, then checked again. Screens dimmed. Indicators flickered. What should have lasted hours barely made it through minutes. Each attempt to transmit came with a calculation no one wanted to make. Use it now and risk nothing later, or wait and risk never getting the chance at all. They tried to be smart about it. Short bursts. Limited range. Enough to reach out, not enough to kill the system outright. Fingers struggled with controls that felt too small, too stiff. The cold turned plastic brittle and skin unresponsive. A button was pressed twice when it should have been once. A setting was almost missed. The signal went out thin and incomplete. Not a clean message. Not a confident call. Just data moving through a hostile environment, bending around terrain, fading as it traveled. Snow swallowed some of it. Distance swallowed more. Interference did the rest. For a moment, nothing happened. No confirmation. No reply. Just silence, heavy and discouraging. Silence has weight when you're waiting for it to break. They waited longer than they should have, hoping. Then they shut the device down to save what little power remained. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood how narrow that window had been. The signal might have gone nowhere. It might have died halfway to its destination. It might have reached someone who dismissed it as noise. Up above and far away, systems were doing what systems do. Sorting, filtering, discarding what doesn't fit expected patterns. Weak signals are common. False alarms happen. The difference between a real emergency and static can be just a few missing details. This one was missing plenty. It didn't arrive clean. Parts were distorted. Timestamps were off. Location data wavered, jumping slightly, enough to make it unreliable. In another context, it would have been easy to ignore. Christmas week meant heavier traffic, more background clutter, more distractions competing for attention. The signal didn't announce urgency. It didn't say freezing or dying or out of time. Machines don't speak that language. They only report numbers, strengths, fragments. It was up to a human to decide whether those fragments mattered. For a brief stretch of time, it almost vanished entirely. Logged but not flagged. Stored but not highlighted. Buried under stronger transmissions that demanded immediate response. The kind of administrative limbo where real people disappear without anyone realizing it's happening. Back on the ground, the weight stretched on. They tried not to look at the device too often, as if staring at it might drain the battery faster. When they did check, the screen stayed dark. No acknowledgement. No reassurance that anyone had heard them at all. Doubt crept in quietly. Had they sent it correctly? Had the antenna been positioned right? Had the cold damaged something internally? Questions with no answers and no way to test them without risking everything they had left. Another attempt was discussed, then delayed. Power was lower now. Significantly lower. The margin for error had shrunk even more. Sending again might help. It might also be the last thing the device ever did. When they finally tried, the output was weaker. Noticeably so. The signal left them limping, barely holding together long enough to escape into the dark. It was the kind of transmission that survives only if someone is already paying attention. That second signal didn't travel far. It didn't need to. It just needed to reach one set of trained eyes, one mind experienced enough to notice what others might miss. A pattern slightly out of place. A blip that didn't belong. The cold had taken its toll by then. Movement slowed further. Thinking narrowed. The device was shut down for good. Whatever had been sent was all there would be. Somewhere between noise and meaning, between background clutter and actionable information, the signal hovered on the edge of being lost entirely, fragile and incomplete, depending less on technology now and more on whether someone chose to look twice instead of once. He didn't notice it because it was loud. He noticed it because it wasn't. Amid the usual flow of data, the routine noise that fills screens and scrolls past tired eyes, something sat just slightly wrong. Not wrong enough to trigger alarms. Not wrong enough to demand attention. Just wrong enough to bother someone who had learned to trust that feeling. A Navy SEAL sniper spends most of his career learning how to see what others miss. It starts with terrain and movement, but it doesn't stop there. Patterns matter. Absences matter. Small deviations can mean the difference between a normal day and a body being carried out under a poncho. That instinct doesn't turn off when the rifle is slung and the mission shifts. The signal showed up as a weak return, fragmented and inconsistent. Most people would have skimmed past it. Some probably did. It didn't fit cleanly into any category. The location data drifted just enough to look unreliable. The strength suggested interference, maybe equipment failure, maybe nothing at all. He paused. Not long. Just long enough to look again. The timestamp caught his eye first. Then the repetition. The way it appeared, faded, then appeared again, slightly altered. Random noise doesn't usually behave that way. Static doesn't try twice. Someone on the other end had made a decision, calculated risk, and pushed a button knowing it might be the last time. He leaned closer to the screen, blocking out everything else. Christmas week meant reduced staffing, increased clutter, and a dozen competing priorities. None of that mattered in that moment. His world narrowed to a few lines of data and the quiet pressure building behind his eyes. He ran the numbers in his head. Cold environment, battery drain, transmission degradation. He'd seen it before, different place, different people, same physics. The kind of signal you get when conditions are already bad and getting worse fast. This wasn't textbook. That was the problem. Textbook situations don't usually kill people. The ones that do live in the margins, in the gaps between protocols. He knew how easy it would be to dismiss it, to mark it as low confidence and move on. He also knew what that decision might cost. He checked again, cross-referenced, compared it to the surrounding noise. The pattern held. Thin, strained, deliberate. Not a machine glitch. Not weather alone. Human hands had been involved. Time mattered now. If he was right, the clock had already been running too long. Hypothermia doesn't wait for confirmation. It doesn't care about certainty. By the time proof arrives, it's often too late to do anything useful with it. He made the call before doubt could catch up. Escalated it. Flagged it higher than it probably deserved on paper. He knew how it would look. He didn't care. Paper doesn't freeze to death. Questions came back immediately. Confidence level. Probability of false positive. Risk assessment. He answered calmly, clearly, without overselling. He didn't need drama. He needed action. While others debated, he kept working the problem. Terrain. Access points. Weather windows. If they were where the signal suggested, they were exposed. If they'd been there as long as he suspected, they were already in trouble. If they were still alive, they wouldn't be for long without help. His training filled in gaps the data couldn't. Experience added weight to instinct. He'd seen what cold does to capable people. He'd watched strong men lose coordination, judgment, consciousness. He knew how quickly it accelerates once it takes hold. The decision point came fast. Wait for more information or act on what they had. Waiting felt safer on paper. Acting felt right in the gut. He chose the gut. He pushed again, harder this time. Emphasized urgency. Reframed the risk. The danger wasn't responding to a weak signal. The danger was ignoring the last signal someone could send. Momentum shifted. Assets were discussed. Timelines adjusted. The machinery of response started to turn, slow at first, then faster as the implications settled in. A possible rescue became a probable one. Probable became immediate. He stayed on it, tracking every update, every delay. He knew that once the decision left his hands, the outcome still depended on dozens of other factors he couldn't control. Weather, equipment, human endurance, luck. But it started with him choosing not to scroll past something that didn't look important enough. Somewhere far below, in the cold, in the dark, people who didn't know his name were still waiting, unaware that a moment of attention, a split-second judgment made by a stranger, had shifted their odds from almost none to just enough to matter. The plan came together under pressure, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but tightens with every passing minute. Conditions were already bad and getting worse. Weather reports showed narrowing windows, rising winds, and temperatures that would punish any mistake. There was no clean option, only choices measured in risk and consequence. Insertion points were limited. Terrain dictated movement. Ice, elevation, exposure. Every routing carried its own set of problems. Too direct, and you risked detection and environmental hazards. Too cautious, and you burned time they didn't have. The balance had to be exact, and exact is rare in places like that. Aircraft performance became a concern immediately. Cold air changes everything. Lift, fuel consumption, mechanical tolerance. Crews ran calculations knowing real conditions would still find ways to surprise them. Equipment was checked and rechecked, not because redundancy guarantees safety, but because failure out there compounds fast. The clock kept ticking. Hypothermia doesn't pause for planning meetings. Every estimate came with an invisible subtraction. However long they thought the survivors could last, reality was probably worse. That knowledge sat quietly in every decision. The extraction itself would have to be fast. No extended stabilization. No comfort. Get in, get them, get out. That sounds simple until you consider bodies that can barely move, hands that can't grip, minds that drift in and out. Moving cold casualties is dangerous. Too fast, and you risk cardiac events. Too slow, and you risk losing them entirely. Medical considerations layered on top of tactical ones. Rewarming protocols, handling procedures, monitoring vitals in environments that make fine motor skills unreliable. Every rescuer would be operating close to their own limits while trying to protect someone else's failing systems. As assets moved into position, communication tightened. Fewer words, clearer intent. There was no room for misunderstanding. A missed instruction could cascade into disaster. Everyone involved understood that once committed, there would be no easy abort. Approach was tense. The landscape offered little margin. Snow swallowed sound. Wind distorted perception. What looked manageable from above became hostile up close. Landing zones were assessed in real time, options shrinking as conditions revealed themselves honestly. The first visual confirmation came late. Too late for comfort. Shapes where there should have been movement. Stillness that didn't feel right. That moment when rescuers realize the problem is worse than expected, but exactly as feared. Contact was made carefully. Voices kept calm, firm, close. Touch confirmed what eyes already suspected. Severe cold exposure. Weak pulses. Slowed responses. Alive, but barely holding the line. Relief existed, but it was sharp-edged, fragile. Every movement was deliberate. Lift, support, secure. Hands worked through stiffness and bulk, fighting gear and gravity. Time compressed. Seconds felt loud. Each casualty transferred felt like stealing something back from the environment that had already claimed ownership. Extraction under those conditions is never smooth. Equipment snagged. Footing slipped. Wind pushed back. The aircraft waited with engines straining, limits approaching. There was no guarantee it would be able to stay much longer. Loading was rushed without being reckless. Bodies were positioned, insulated, monitored. Medics worked in confined space, balancing urgency with restraint. Too much heat too fast can be as dangerous as none at all. Everything was a calculated compromise. As they lifted out, the ground dropped away into darkness and cold, indifferent to what had just happened. The environment didn't react. It never does. It doesn't acknowledge loss or rescue. It simply remains, waiting for the next mistake. Inside the aircraft, attention stayed fixed on the casualties. Breathing, color, heart rhythm. Small signs mattered. A flutter of eyelids. A change in pulse. Proof that they were still in the fight, however weak. The flight out was quiet. Not because things were fine, but because focus had narrowed to essentials. No one spoke unless necessary. Every vibration felt amplified. Every alarm, real or imagined, tightened nerves. They knew better than to celebrate. Rescue doesn't end when wheels leave the ground. It ends when hands are warm, cores are stable, and hearts keep beating without help. Until then, nothing is guaranteed. The extraction had worked, barely, against weather, terrain, and time, pulled off by people making hard decisions in narrow margins where success and failure sit close enough to touch. The first signs came quietly. A pulse that steadied instead of fading. Breaths that grew less shallow. Small changes that meant everything to the people watching for them. Survival doesn't arrive in a dramatic rush. It shows up in subtle reversals, in numbers that stop falling and start to hold. Inside the aircraft, the environment was controlled but tense. Heat was introduced carefully, deliberately. Too much, too fast could shock systems already pushed to the edge. Blankets were layered. Warm air circulated. Fluids were managed with caution. Every action balanced urgency against restraint. The rescued barely reacted at first. Their bodies were still locked in conservation mode, protecting core organs, limiting response. Eyes fluttered open and closed. Words, when they came, were slurred and fragmented. Recognition lagged. Time felt broken for them, stretched and compressed by cold and exhaustion. Medics stayed close, hands steady despite vibration and noise. They watched monitors like hawks, tracking rhythms that could change without warning. Cold hearts are unpredictable. A sudden movement, a jolt, even relief can trigger dangerous responses. Calm was as much a medical tool as anything in their kits. As warmth returned, pain followed. Nerves waking up sent sharp reminders through hands and feet. Grimaces replaced blank stares. That discomfort was a good sign. It meant circulation was coming back, that systems were re-engaging instead of shutting down. No one complained. Complaints require strength. The flight seemed longer than it was. Every minute mattered, but now each minute brought improvement instead of decline. Color returned slowly to faces that had gone pale and gray. Lips shifted away from blue. Fingers twitched, then curled weakly, as if remembering what they were meant to do. Christmas existed again, faintly, on the edges of awareness. Not as celebration, but as reference. A marker of time they hadn't realized they were about to lose. Someone whispered a question about the date. The answer landed heavy and light at the same time. On the ground, more hands took over. Transfer was smooth, practiced. Stretchers rolled. Doors opened to bright light and controlled warmth. The contrast was overwhelming for bodies that had been living on the edge of freezing. Adjustments were made continuously, fine-tuning the balance between safety and speed. Emergency rooms don't pause for stories. They respond to data. Vitals stabilized further. Core temperatures climbed out of critical ranges. The immediate threat loosened its grip, though it didn't disappear entirely. Hypothermia leaves marks. Recovery is measured in hours and days, not moments. Awareness returned in layers. Confusion faded. Memory filled in gaps. The realization of what had almost happened settled slowly, unevenly. Gratitude mixed with disbelief. Survival often carries weight alongside relief. Some of them asked who had found them. Names were shared sparingly. No one framed it as heroics. It was explained simply. A signal. Someone paying attention. A decision made in time. Elsewhere, people who had spent days operating under pressure finally exhaled. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to acknowledge the shift from crisis to outcome. There were reports to file, debriefs to attend, equipment to reset. The machine kept moving. Christmas arrived whether anyone was ready or not. For those who had been pulled back from the edge, it felt different. Sharper. Quieter. Warmer in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. The ordinary things carried more weight. Blankets. Hot drinks. The sound of voices nearby. The cold didn't win, but it came close. Close enough to leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. A reminder of how thin the line can be, how much depends on timing, attention, and the willingness to act on incomplete information. Lives continued, altered but intact. Families gathered who might have been mourning instead. Plans resumed that had nearly ended. The ripple effects moved outward, unseen but real. What saved them wasn't a single moment, but a chain of decisions, each one made under pressure, each one leaning slightly toward action instead of hesitation, toward effort instead of dismissal, until the balance tipped just enough in favor of life.